Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we will be discussing Season 7, Episode 19, The Hucksters.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in The Hucksters.
We open with Howard arriving home from a hardware convention.
Something happened to me in Chicago that's going to change our whole lives.
He recounts to his family meeting Freddie Krebel, a man who used to work for him and is now a millionaire with a chain of hardware stores. The trick, according to Freddie, is advertising. So Howard is planning to shoot a commercial, and Richie will be writing the ad copy.
I want all of you to think about what you want when we're rich.
Well, what do we want?
We want to eat.
Yeah. You got it.
A couple of days later, everyone gathers around the TV at Arnold's to watch the commercial, which is extremely boring.
Remember our famous motto, if you need hammers or nails or wrenches or pliers or bolts or...
Howard thinks it's terrific, though, and he's confident the store will be jam-packed soon. He's not correct. The store is empty all day that Saturday. Richie says the problem is that they didn't know what they were doing.
I think I finally figured out what our problem is. We don't know what the heck we're doing!
Richie's a journalist. He doesn't know anything about advertising. He does know someone who does, though. Ed Van Buren, who lectured at his college.
Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go find him, huh?
The next night at the Cunningham house, Ed is discussing the ad campaign with Howard.
Cunningham Hardware is not a very big store.
Mr. Cunningham, it's not a big store yet.
He promises a 40% increase in business in 2 months, or Howard gets his money back, in exchange for Ed having complete control. First off, Ed wants all 4 of the Cunninghams in the ad.
On TV?
Us?
Wow. Well, Howard, what are you waiting for? You have the guarantee. Just sign it. It's like the 4 of us. You're going to be a star.
Several days later, the Cunninghams are rehearsing the ad at the store. In the ad, Howard touts the store's friendliness and says when you shop at Cunningham Hardware, you're family, and the other Cunninghams come out to further prove it.
Would you like some cookies? We just baked them.
There's also a jingle.
We'd like to sell this to you. A hammer, a hacksaw, a bolt, a screw.
The rehearsal goes well, but Ed thinks it would work better if Richie was younger. He sends him to wardrobe, and for the next rehearsal, Richie is wearing short pants and a propeller beanie. He's not terribly comfortable with it.
Well, how much do you really want to be in this commercial?
Less and less, all the time.
So Ed replaces him with a child actor named Billy.
Nobody ever said that show business was fair.
They start rehearsal again, but they stop when Billy refers to Joni as his little sister. Ed isn't sure the commercial needs 2 kids, and Joni really wants to get out of the commercial, so Ed decides to replace her with a dog. Marion is horrified.
Howard, say something. Your daughter's been replaced by a dog.
And Howard raises his concerns to Ed, but he reminds Howard that he was given complete control. Then Ed replaces Howard with a more conventionally attractive actor.
When women see him on television, they're going to come into this store just looking for an excuse to buy something.
Yes, but when they get here, they're going to find me.
And cast Howard as Iggy the Stock Boy. Finally, Marion is replaced by a buxom blonde.
Hi, where do you want me cuddles?
Before the final rehearsal, Fonzie shows up.
Do you belong here?
I belong everywhere.
Ed reveals to Howard he has a final surprise, and then the rehearsal begins. The commercial more or less goes as before, except then Hank Aaron shows up to say Hammer and Hank only buys his hammers at Cunningham Hardware.
You know, they lead the league in friendly service.
Fonzie doesn't think much of replacing the Cunninghams with actors, and Howard asks if Ed replacing the Cunninghams with actors is legal. Ed admits it's not strictly legal.
By the time they dragged it through the courts, you'd be so rich, it wouldn't matter.
And Howard realizes he's been too focused on the money. The live performance and airing begins. This time, Howard breaks character and declares he's the real Howard Cunningham.
Now look, folks, all of this is really nonsense. This man here, he is not Howard Cunningham.
And his family are the real Cunninghams. He does bring Hank Aaron in, though. Richie fanboys over him and shows him his signed baseball glove from the World Series.
Remember you signed that right before the 57 World Series?
It was the thrill of my life.
Autographing my glove?
No, you're playing in the World Series.
Fonzie finishes off the ad.
Come down here, leave a lot of money, I love you. Whoa.
That night at the Cunningham house, Richie is showing Hank Aaron a scrapbook of Richie playing baseball. Hank says he has to leave.
Yeah, the season starts in 3 months.
Howard thanks him for appearing in the commercial, and Fonzie says he loves his style and his name.
Thank you, Peter. That was The Hucksters. It first aired back on February 5th, 1980. Happy Days was followed that night by a new Good Time Girls in which cab driver Frankie, Adrian Samed, nearly gets drafted into the Army.
I don't want to get drafted. I don't want to go. I don't want to get drafted.
CBS had a new episode of The White Shadow.
I've come up with a name for you, The White Shadow.
I'm white. I'm shadowing you.
is very clever.
in which one of the players, Jeffers, has PCP slipped into his drink at a party. It's up to Coach Reeves and a narcotics cop to figure out who did it. And NBC had a new episode of The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo, in which an ex-con named Harry Cunningham comes back to town and sets up a high-priced escort service, with Lobo himself serving as a chaperone and chauffeur. Also, Lobo mistakenly thinks he's going to die after getting the wrong diagnosis from his doctor. So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
1, I can't believe that the White Shadow would so blatantly rip off an episode of Happy Days, King Richard's Big Night. And 2, I see that once again, Sheriff Lobo is just shoving 2 different plots together to make an episode. So it's gonna be hard for me to choose between those 2. I keep choosing Sheriff Lobo, so I guess this time I will choose the White Shadow instead, just to see how they handle that plot compared to Happy Days.
I also noticed that the plot of The White Shadow was blatantly ripped off from Happy Days, and now I'm starting to wonder if PCP was the drug given to Richard in that episode.
It's possible. I assume it was easier to get in the 1960s than it is now, because drugs were just super easy to get in the 1960s. Everyone was on them. It wasn't just the hippies.
Housewives were taking drugs in those days, so.
Yep.
The Hucksters was directed by Jerry Paris and was written by Mark Rothman. The last time Mark actually got a script credit was A Date with Fonzie back in season 3, but he's been credited as a
producer, executive script consultant, creative consultant, and executive consultant
on many episodes. As for guest stars this week, boy, do we have them. Warren Berlinger returns to the show, this time as Mr. Van Buren.
Don't move the camera.
How would you like to be dead on live TV?
Move the camera.
This was Warren's 4th time on Happy Days after
Richie's Flip Side, The Physical, and Hollywood Part 2.
In all, Warren played 5 different characters on Happy Days. What did you think of Warren Berlinger in this episode, Peter?
Oh, he's a lot of fun. He's extremely slimy. He's very conniving. It's very fun to watch him push Howard around.
Warren is absolutely the engine that drives this episode, and this is the kind of part that this actor was just born to play. It's rather similar to the sleazy Hollywood director he played in Hollywood Part 2. This is the kind of thing that he can knock out of the park, and he absolutely does it. We also have Charles Howerton as Bart, the fake Howard.
Well, sir, when you come to Cunningham's hardware store, you're treated just like one of the family.
Charles is a very prolific film and TV actor from Cuero, Texas, who's been working in Hollywood since the mid-1960s. Prior to this episode, he was in the 1976 movie Eat My Dust with Ron Howard. Charles's other films include The Black Gestapo, Up from the Depths, Chaplin, and The Onion Movie. On TV, he's been everywhere.
Lou Grant, Barnaby Jones, A-Team, Matlock, Married with Children, Superstore.
My Name is Earl, Days of Our Lives, and American Crime Story.
And that's not even counting his voiceover work. He narrated the American version of the Japanese show Spectre Man in the 1970s.
The planet Earth, the city Tokyo. Like all cities on the face of this planet, Tokyo is losing the battle against man's deadliest enemies, waste and pollution.
And he narrated the show Alien Nation in the 1990s. His cartoon credits include
Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, plus Justice League, The Iron Giant, Pinky and the Brain, The Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries,
and much more. What did you think of Charles Howerton as the fake Howard?
For all that resume is impressively stacked, he doesn't really get a lot to do in this episode. His main role is just to be handsome and perform his lines, and he does a good job at that.
I thought he did a great job at being this very bland, handsome, generic actor. Like you say, there's not a lot to this character, but I think Charles is fun in the few minutes that he gets. We then have Sparky Marcus as Billy, the fake Richie.
Don't hold me to the copy. I might throw in a couple of things if I get hot.
Marcus Asolio, a.k.a. Sparky Marcus, is a California native who became one of the most prolific child actors of the 70s and 80s. He may be best remembered as child evangelist Jimmy Joe Jeter on Mary Hartman, but he was also a regular on Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, The Nancy Walker Show, Grandpa Goes to Washington, and The Bad News Bears. His other TV credits include Maude, WKRP in Cincinnati, What's Happening, and Emergency. In the 80s, he did plenty of cartoon voiceover work, playing the title character on Richie Rich.
Professor Keenbean's new additions to my game room are sure neat, Dollar. I can't wait to try out my new basketball court.
He was also Montgomery Moose on the Get Along Gang, TJ Tiger on Shirt Tales, and Nick Burns on Challenge of the GoBots. Sparky's movies include The Man with Two Brains, Viva Knievel, and Freaky Friday. Peter, what did you think of Sparky Marcus as Billy?
Oh, he was great. I love that as soon as we see him, he basically doesn't act like an innocent kid. He just immediately goes into hardened showbiz veteran mode when he tells Richie, yeah, that's showbiz. Give me the beanie. I'm going to be better than you.
Sparky is so fun here. He's this very Hollywood kid who's very much in this show business world and talks like he's 40 years old. That was a super fun part of the episode. We also have Hoke Howell as Sidney. He's the customer in the commercial.
Well, tell me, is this a friendly hardware store?
Hoke was an extremely prolific character actor from Georgia whose career lasted from the early 60s to the late 90s. TV viewers may have seen him on Dennis the Menace, The Andy Griffith Show, The Munsters, Bonanza, Lost in Space, The Brady Bunch, Bewitched, The Dukes of Hazzard, Quincy, Fame, Jag, The Wonder Years, and too many more to mention. Hoke was also in several films directed by Ron Howard, including Grand Theft Auto, The Time Crystal, and Far and Away. Unfortunately, he died in 1997 at the age of just 67. What did you think of Hoke Howell as Sidney?
As with the actor playing Barch, it's a pretty thankless role, just there to be bland and pretty and say lines.
Well, I thought he did a pretty good job overselling the friendliness of Cunningham Hardware, and gosh, you guys are friendly. I thought that was kind of fun. I could tell that Hoke was a veteran character actor. He delivers his lines just so professionally and smoothly. We also have Tafa O'Connell as Ingrid, the fake Marion.
Would you like a cookie?
Well, thank you.
This is Tafa's second appearance just this season. She played one of the models in the episode Joni. We talked about her extensive film and TV career when we reviewed that episode. So, Peter, what did you think of Tafa O'Connell as Ingrid?
She somehow gets even less to do than Bart does, which is a shame.
All of these parts are pretty small, but they're supposed to just be show business phonies who are very insincere and are overselling Cunningham Hardware. And I think they all do pretty well at that. Obviously, the main guest star of the episode is Henry Aaron. Born in Alabama in 1934, Hammer and Hank became one of the greatest hitters in baseball history, remaining in the major leagues for 23 seasons from 1954 to 1976, generally as a right fielder, but as a designated hitter near the end. He spent many of those years in Milwaukee, starting his career with the Milwaukee Braves and ending it with the Milwaukee Brewers. In the middle of Hank's career, though, the Milwaukee Braves moved to Atlanta and became the Atlanta Braves, so he played down there and also became a hero to the people of Atlanta. It was Hank who broke Babe Ruth's home run record and held it for 33 years.
A black man is getting a standing ovation in the Deep South for breaking a record of an all-time baseball idol. And it is a great moment for all of us, and particularly for Henry Aaron.
Henry Louis Aaron died in 2021. So, Peter, what did you think of Hammerin' Hank Aaron?
I liked him a lot. For someone who's not an actor, he seemed very natural on screen, and his part in the tag, where he's very clearly not interested in Richie's scrapbook, but he's kind of feigning interest just to be polite.
Now, that's a picture of me diving after a line drive.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
That was good acting. I also love his line about how he buys all his hammers at Cunningham Hardware, because I suspect that Henry Aaron does not do a lot of hammering. He is a baseball player. He's not a guy who does home repairs, and he probably hires people to do that. But honestly, I think that line would probably work on me. I would probably say to myself, if Hammer and Hank buys his hammers at Cunningham Hardware, I should buy them there too.
I would definitely be convinced by this commercial to shop at Cunningham Hardware. Athletes of all sports have appeared in a variety of completely ridiculous commercials, often doing very silly things and playing characters and dressing up in costumes to sell whatever they're supposed to be selling, from Coca-Cola to tires to oil changes or whatever they're selling. Hank Aaron's appearance in this, I think he's very convincing playing himself. And as you said, the most fun part is actually in the tag when he's bored to death by Richie's scrapbook and he just wants to get out. As for songs this week, there's only one. The Cunningham Hardware Jingle by Tom Bosley, Aaron Moran, Marion Ross, and Ron Howard. It's sung to the tune of I Wanna Be Loved by You. This was originally written in 1928 for a musical called Good Boy, where it was sung by Helen Kane, the Boo-Boop-a-Doop girl.
I wanna be loved by you, just you, nobody else but you. I wanna be loved by you, alone. Boop-boop-a-doo.
Closer to the time of this episode, it was sung by Marilyn Monroe in the 1959 film Some Like It Hot. What did you think of the Cunningham Hardware jingle?
I like that they managed to work in the line from Richie's not great commercial about how Cunningham Hardware has nails and screws and hammers.
I thought it was fun that they were singing this slightly flirty song that we associate with Betty Boop and Marilyn Monroe and Ginger on Gilligan's Island.
Hey, they mentioned screws in it.
As for cultural and historical references, Howard mentions eating at a place called Fatty Burger. This is fictional, and I'm not sure if it's supposed to be in Chicago or Milwaukee since he's come from Chicago at the beginning of this episode, but the name is certainly very similar to Fat Burger, a West Coast burger chain founded in 1947.
I want a man with a fat burger in his hand.
Cunningham Hardware is said to be at the corner of 8th and East Boulevard. As we said in their closing inspiration point, there is no East Boulevard in Milwaukee, but there is an 8th Street. Naturally, the film being shown on Zombie Theater is a Paramount classic.
And now back to Zombie Theater.
It's War of the Worlds from 1953, based on the novel by H.G. Wells, directed by Byron Haskin, and starring Gene Barry and Anne Robinson as Earthlings trying to fend off a Martian invasion. In fact, the commercial director in this episode, Mr. Van Buren, is named after Anne Robinson's character, Sylvia Van Buren.
Oh.
We get a fair amount of advertising executive talk in this episode. Let's put this on the back porch and see if the cat licks it up. Let's plant that in the ground and see what grows. Let's stick it in the toaster and see if it pops. From what I gather, real advertising executives never actually spoke this way, but they were often parodied as talking like this in sitcoms, cartoons, and sketches in the late 1950s and early 1960s.
Let's line it up the flagpole and see if it'll wave. Let's line it up the flagpole and see if it'll wave. Let's line it up the flagpole and see if it'll wave. Let's line it up the flagpole and see if it'll wave.
They did the same kind of joke in Stolen Melodies last season. There's a lot of discussion of truth in advertising laws in this episode.
Lay it on the line. Let's have a little truth in advertising for a change.
What they might be referring to is the Lanham Act of 1947, which was designed to fight false advertising. For the record, it is illegal to lie in a TV commercial. So if you think Fonzie is overreacting, he's not. There probably would not be criminal charges based on this commercial, but there could definitely be lawsuits brought against Cunningham Hardware because people could say that they made purchases under false pretenses. The beanie with the propeller on top was popularized by the character Beanie Boy, who started out as a puppet on the TV show Time for Beanie, which ran from 1949 to 1955. In 1962, Beanie got his own animated series, The Beanie and Cecil Show.
It's the Beanie and Cecil Show.
My main association with beanie propellers is that one arc of Calvin and Hobbes when Calvin sends away for a beanie propeller and he thinks that it'll make him be able to fly and stuff, but when he puts it on, it just spins on his head and nothing happens.
Beanie propellers have been disappointing children for over half a century. The 1957 World Series is mentioned several times in this episode. That year, the Milwaukee Braves, including Hank Aaron, defeated the defending champion New York Yankees. And Richie says that Billy is cruising for a bruising.
This kid's cruising for a bruising.
Well, this is sometimes thought of as quintessential 1950s slang. It actually goes back to the 1940s. It means looking for trouble. Fonzie says that Annette Funicello autographed his helmet. We've discussed Annette Funicello before. She was the singer and actress who became a sensation on TV's The Mickey Mouse Club in the 1950s and in the Beach Party movies of the 1960s. Before embarking on this podcast, how familiar were you with Annette Funicello?
I'd seen clips of one of the Beach Party movies with Frankie Avalon, so I knew who she was.
Yes, Don Amici, a native of Kenosha, Wisconsin, did play Alexander Graham Bell in a movie.
Don Amici played Alexander Graham Bell, didn't he?
Yeah, right, but he wasn't selling phones, you know?
He was in the 1939 biopic The Story of Alexander Graham Bell, opposite Loretta Young.
The reason deaf mutes can't speak is that they have bad ears and not bad vocal cords.
The Story of Alexander Graham Bell, would that appeal to you at all?
Probably not. I imagine it wouldn't touch on Bell's interest in eugenics.
Fon says, on the seventh day, he takes a rest. He's paraphrasing the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 2. And on the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had made. That ridiculously long, clunky sentence is how it is in the Bible.
The people who wrote the Bible really needed an editor.
And when Fonzie tells Hank Aaron, I love your name, some fans think this is an in-joke reference to Henry Winkler. Do you think that was the intention here with that joke?
I figure it would have to be because otherwise it doesn't make a ton of sense.
Maybe Fonz just likes the name Henry?
It's a good sturdy name.
Other observations. Tom Bosley gets a huge cheer from the studio audience when he enters.
Hi, Daddy's home. Hi, sweetheart.
This almost makes up for the Chachi thing from 2 weeks ago.
It's what Tom Bosley deserves. He's a reliable and great performer, and I love him.
Okay, let's settle something. Is it Cunningham Hardware or Cunningham's Hardware?
I feel like the first one fits better. I don't know. The second one just doesn't feel right to me.
And on the window of the place that we see over and over again in this episode, it says Cunningham Hardware, but in the commercials, everybody says Cunningham's.
Maybe it's just an error on Ed's part, and when Howard tries to correct him, he just reminds him that he has complete control.
That's right. He does have complete control over the commercial. That's a good point. I know Richie is not a professional advertising copywriter, but come on, he could have come up with better copy than what he does. But I do like the fact that when the announcer is reading his words, Richie is excitedly lip-syncing along with him. Did you notice that when he's watching the commercial at Arnold's?
Yes, he's so proud of what he wrote, even though he probably shouldn't be.
With all this talk in the episode about replacing family members or losing them altogether, it's difficult not to think of Chuck Cunningham, who was both recast and then written out. Do you think that any of this was an in-joke reference to Chuck Cunningham?
I kind of hope it was. I wonder if they ever considered replacing Chuck with a dog.
They also did a clock wipe in this episode to show the passage of time. That's kind of a rarity on Happy Days. It seems like we're getting those editing transitions less and less on the show. Do you remember the checkerboards that we used to get all the time?
Yeah, those were great.
The cameras filming Howard's commercials say WZAZ. That station has been mentioned many times in Happy Days, including Big Money, the Howdy Doody Show, and Dance Contest. Whenever they need a TV station in town, they say WZAZ. And Ron Howard is a huge baseball fan, so he is not acting when he meets Hank Aaron. That excitement is genuine. Did you feel Ron Howard's genuine excitement during that scene?
Oh, definitely. It was very charming. It was very charming.
I know Ron has one foot out the door already by the time this episode is made, but this must have been like a dream week for him. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in this episode?
No, not really. Outside of the beanie propeller and the short pants.
I'm going to mention two things. First off, Warren Berlinger's suit that he wears all through this episode, the sky blue blazer and the huge wide lapels. He obviously looks like something out of the 1970s, but he's somehow in the 1960s. And I have to give a thumbs up to the plaid blazer that Hank Aaron wears for the commercial.
Is that the kind of thing Hank Aaron would usually wear?
Did he bring that to the set, or did wardrobe give him that? I don't know. So, Peter, did you have any other observations that you wanted to make about the Hucksters?
So as with Joyce Brothers, in the episode she appeared in, I guess we just have to pretend that Hank Aaron looking about 20 years older than he would have at the time is just a coincidence and not weird. Just ignore that. Just accept it as part of the show. Also, how did Ed get Hank Aaron to be in the commercial? You know, he's a sports superstar. Presumably he's very busy, and presumably his time costs a lot of money. What is the budget on this commercial?
You would be surprised at the penny ante local commercials that somehow managed to get fairly big athletes to appear.
Maybe that's not unrealistic. Maybe that's just the kind of thing Hank Aaron would do in 1961.
Since he was playing for the Milwaukee team, he probably would be doing commercials in Milwaukee. And some of the ones that I have seen are actually pretty crummy that athletes have done.
Maybe this whole thing was just a money laundering scam by Ed.
I wouldn't put anything past that guy. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
This episode was a hoot, and I'm very glad we watched it. I liked that this was an episode where Howard was the one being senseless and making bad decisions, because a lot of the time he's a pre-Homer Simpson sitcom dad, so like he's the one who's sensible, he's the one who gives people speeches so that they think about what they're doing, and in this episode he's the one doing something half-cocked because he wants to improve business at his store, because seeing that someone who used to work for him is doing better than he is offends his pride.
As we've seen earlier this season with their closing inspiration point, Cunningham Hardware is one of Howard's blind spots, basically. To get that extra business, he'll do just about anything, and he'll sell out his principals or sell his family down the river, basically, to make more money for this hardware store.
But, you know, he makes the right decision in the end.
Yeah, both times he eventually does come around to the right decision, because at the core, Howard is a responsible, caring person, and he's not going to do the wrong thing, even if it means an uptick in business. I think it was like 5% in their closing inspiration point, and it's 40% here, so the stakes are much higher. But this episode is so entertaining from beginning to end. The fake commercials are just so fun. Even the bad one that they do at the beginning is fun. I liked all the phony actors coming in, especially Sparky Marcus being this incredible brat on the set.
There's something very funny about watching children bully adults and do so successfully.
And Sparky is so funny at doing that. The Hucksters was a great episode for me, and this was one that it was just a delight to revisit and review for this podcast. And again, I'd like to think that even Ron Howard, who had gotten tired of being on Happy Days, had a lot of fun making this. It seems like the entire cast did.
Well, he got to meet Hank Aaron. And he got to wear a beanie propeller.
I like Fonzie's role in this as the conscience.
Because he's the one outside of the middle class box. He's the one who's able to point out to Howard, hey, this is stupid and also probably illegal.
This is one of those times when Fonzie actually steers Howard back onto the right track, which is not always how they do it. The Hucksters is highly recommended. Very fun episode, very entertaining, and funny, too. I actually laughed out loud several times during this episode, which I don't always do during Happy Days. So highly recommended. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful, wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Wolfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Fonzie romances a deaf girl in Allison.
That sounds like a very intriguing episode indeed. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Well, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out a warning, I'd hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land.
hammers or nails or wrenches or pliers or bolts or...